Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at OccupyFantasy.com, here with some NFL DFS picks and tips for the Week 4 slates on FanDuel and DraftKings. Talking about the wide receiver position in this video. And this is actually an exciting opportunity to talk about wide receivers because we've seen 3 weeks of play, which is the sample that we're confident in for opportunities, which is targets, routes run, usage with wide receivers, to really forecast for you who's underperforming, who are some wide receivers that have really strong roles on their teams, just haven't given us the value that they probably should have to this point. So we'll be talking about those during this video at some point, so make sure you stay tuned to check that out. Those guys are definitely guys that we want to focus on in our tournament lineups in DFS contests here in Week 4. We're dropping position previews here every single week throughout the season, so if you like that, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. You'll get notified when we have new content for you. Posting something pretty much new almost every day now here on the Occupy Fantasy YouTube channel, so you're definitely going to want to check that out. If you like this video, we would really appreciate it if you give us a thumbs up on the video. Let us know that you want to see more stuff like this throughout the weekend, throughout the season, and we'll make sure that we deliver that to you. If you have any questions about wide receivers on this slate, the comment section below is the best place to drop those. We'll respond as soon as we can, and obviously the other thing you can do is you consider joining our Discord. There's a link to join the Discord above the description of the video. Go through that and you'll be able to talk to other Occupy staff and members about every single NFL DFS slate throughout the rest of the season, as well as the other sports that are going on in the DFS world. So the first wide receiver to really start our discussion with here is Davante Adams. Davante Adams has been, for the last 19 or so regular season slates plus the playoffs last year, pretty much the most consistent wide receiver there is in the NFL. He's priced under $8,000 here on DraftKings, and this was a really key price point last year with him. When he comes in under $8,000, it's really hard to pass on Davante Adams and his expected volume. Obviously the targets went berserk in week 3 here, 18, but really think he's the safest wide receiver we can project for close to double-digit targets every single week. In fact, the Occupy model at OccupyFantasy.com has actually been released here. It's Wednesday evening when we're recording this video, and we project him for 8.6. So call it 8-9 targets in week 4 here against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Adams with, a very healthy 43% share of the air yards from Aaron Rodgers so far this year. No surprise there. Targeted on, this number just causes me a double take every time I look at it. Over 56% of his routes in week 3 in that game against the 49ers on Sunday Night Football. That wasn't 11 routes, right? He wasn't targeted on 6 out of 11 routes. He ran 30, 35 routes, something like that. So Davante Adams very, very heavily involved. Obviously was the man that Rodgers looked for in the key game-winning drive situation. He's always going to be that guy. And he's basically the goal line back in this offense. We saw against the 49ers, they drew up that classic play for Davante Adams where they kind of move him around pre-snap, get him open, try to just get him a touchdown. That's what Aaron Rodgers likes to do down near the goal line. Obviously, Aaron Jones will get his work too, week in and week out. We've seen that already this year, but Davante Adams, one of these safer plays at this position always. You have to pay for it. 79 here, 8,100 over on the FanDuel side of things, but never a bad wide receiver to consider starting, building your lineups with, as long as he retains this role. And really kind of 2021's Davante Adams is the guy priced right beneath him this year. It's Cooper Kupp, who has just been somewhat overperforming, frankly, every single week. Double-digit targets every single week, 5 touchdowns through 3 games. We talked about having some underperforming wide receivers for you that we'll talk about here in a second. Kupp definitely on the other side of the spectrum, but for a reason. He's very clearly formed a great relationship with Matthew Stafford. They trust each other. Expect Kupp to continue to be heavily involved in this Rams offense. Just understand when we're telling you that he's overperforming, all that means is that he's getting a certain amount of opportunity and he's just exceeding it. And that just is not something that you can rely on consistently over, a 17, 18-week sample here as we get into the playoffs with the Rams this year. It looks like that's where they're headed. Here against the Arizona Cardinals in week 4, we probably do want some exposure to Cooper Kupp in low-risk lineups. He's definitely on the table as one of the guys we want to consider. And if you are looking at building a high-risk lineup following the strategy that we strongly advocate for in our free NFL DFS strategy guide at OccupyFantasy.com, where you'll be 3-1 game stacking, either side of a game. Cooper Kupp is one of the pass catchers you want to make sure you have probably in your Arizona Cardinals, Los Angeles Rams game stacks here in week 4. He's going to be the safest wide receiver in that game, most likely to have involved in those environments. We project him for 8 closer to 9 targets really in the Occupy model this week. One of our favorite receivers once again. He's got about a 33% share of the air yards and targets from Matthew Stafford thus far in 2021. Our first underperforming wide receiver that we're going to talk about is Stefon Diggs. For someone who's seen, 31 targets through 3 games, plenty of air yards. He's got a 34% share of Josh Allen's air yards. He's just not scoring as many fantasy points as we expect based off of that usage. And so he's one of the strong candidates to regress, so to speak, back to his expected production and do that in a good spot here against the Houston Texans, a game where Buffalo is heavily favored. He is still Josh Allen's favorite target, just hasn't necessarily translated to, those catches that end up in that nice little box at the end of the field that result in a ton of fantasy points, right? So definitely think Stefon Diggs is one of the better plays this week because not only does he project for strong opportunity and a strong matchup for the Buffalo Bills, but he's been underperforming the opportunity he's been receiving as well. More on the underperforming receivers in a second. Same game, other team. Everybody that sort of wrote Brandon Cooks off all summer had him ranked, as a fringe wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, really kind of looking silly right now. He's pretty much proven that he's always going to be, or at least not always, but he's still a very reliable target in this offense. He's the best, most competent, most capable receiver for the Houston Texans. Doesn't matter who the quarterback is, Tyrod Taylor or Davis Mills. They're targeting him heavily, so he's gotten over double-digit targets in 2 consecutive weeks. Houston's probably chasing points against the Bills in this game, right? Which means that they're dropping back to pass, which means that Davis Mills is looking for Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks and Chris Conley led this team in routes from outside wide receiver positions in week 3 against the Carolina Panthers. That is probably not going to change here. Anthony Miller is now back from an injury that knocked him out of the first 2 weeks of the season, pretty much exclusively running slot routes for Houston. So definitely think Brandon Cooks will continue to be probably one of the better wide receivers available to you. I mean, he has over a 50% share of the air yards from Houston quarterbacks this year, which is asinine. He has a 33% share of the targets. And if you account for Nico Collins, Danny Amendola, some of these guys that have played for them early in the year that are already missing time, he actually does account for an even larger share of the opportunity when you adjust for that. So Brandon Cooks definitely a really strong play here in all lineup types, I would say, in week 4, and probably going to be a strong play most weeks if he continues to command this opportunity in the Texans offense. His price is a little too low given the role that he has for Houston here. Another wide receiver whose price probably is one to watch over the next several weeks if he continues to be targeted as heavily as he has been is DJ Moore. I think one of the frustrations in kind of season-long and dynasty fantasy world right now is, if you believed in Robbie Anderson, hasn't really been doing much, and that's because Sam Darnold is locked in on DJ Moore right now. Against the Cowboys, we could probably expect a little bit more of that here in week 4, especially with the loss of Christian McCaffrey, at least in the near term for the Panthers. Definitely feels like DJ Moore has a strong command of the primary opportunities in this offense for Carolina. I want to say it was pretty wild, the target distribution in that game against Houston, particularly early on. Sam Darnold threw something like his first 9 or 10 passes, and like 6 or 7 of them went to DJ Moore exclusively. Hard to imagine that pace keeps up. We probably go back to a more normal distribution of targets between him and Robbie Anderson and Terrace Marshall out of the slot. But DJ Moore is definitely a really strong wide receiver to play week in and week out as long as he has this role with Sam Darnold in this Carolina Panthers offense. Doesn't hurt to be playing in a pace-up spot against Dallas, who likes to play pretty fast-paced too. So even though Carolina is the underdog side here, definitely have some strong interest in DJ Moore this week in DFS lineups, both types, low risk and high risk. We got the season debut of, a much maligned kind of player, definitely a polarizing one, but Odell immediately steps in for Cleveland in a pretty non-competitive game as far as the final score anyway. It took a while for Cleveland to compile the points, but immediately commanded a huge opportunity, 9 targets from Baker Mayfield. That was good for about 25% of his attempts in that game. Again, just a 1-game sample, just under 50% of the team air yards in that game, 49%. Because it's just one game with Odell, he doesn't necessarily fully qualify for an underperforming wide receiver list. But at that workload, he definitely underperformed what he received in week 3 against the Bears. So we really like his opportunity to do something special here in week 4 against the Vikings in a game that we really think will be more competitive on both sides of the ball. Odell Beckham just 5,800 here on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel, and we project him for about 9 targets as well in this matchup. Now, while Odell doesn't necessarily qualify as an underperforming wide receiver, we have several other guys that I haven't discussed yet who do. Already gave you Stefon Diggs a few minutes ago here. Chase Claypool has been the most underperforming wide receiver in the NFL through 3 weeks of play. And so what is an underperforming wide receiver as we define it here at Occupy Fantasy? Probably how most people define it, frankly. There is a pretty reliable way to forecast what someone's expected fantasy point production is. And it's roughly based off of, the number of air yards that a wide receiver receives, number of targets, roughly the league averages on how often air yards are converted to touchdowns. We can start to build models and forecasts, okay, according to these league averages and how players are performing, who's overperforming the opportunity they're receiving and who's underperforming based off of their role. Chase Claypool, for example, leads our list here. This is a chronological. This is in order of, most underperforming to quote unquote least underperforming on our list here. Chase Claypool has seen about 363, 370 air yards, depending on what source you're looking at. So that his opportunity has kind of looked like it should be about 68 fantasy points, total raw fantasy points, over 3 weeks of play with Ben Roethlisberger, given how often he's been targeted, how often those types of targets should be caught by receivers, and then how often, based off of those air yards, receivers that see that opportunity should be scoring touchdowns. Chase Claypool has 0 touchdowns through 3 weeks, has only 36 fantasy points compared to the roughly 68 we expect. So Chase Claypool, the poster child of the underperforming wide receiver list this week. Miami wide receiver Davante Parker, just to give you another example, has seen just shy of 300 air yards, 299. His expected fantasy point production in our model is about 55 points through 3 weeks of play, only 29.5. Again, no touchdowns for Davante Parker, despite having a really strong role that suggests he probably should have had at least one already. We go through the rest of the list here. I already talked about Stefon Diggs earlier in the video. Devonta Smith commanding a really strong role from Jalen Hurts in the Eagles offense. Sammy Watkins, surprisingly, with a much stronger role for the Ravens than I think we expected. Both Marquise Brown and Sammy Watkins have actually received a little bit more opportunity through 3 weeks of play than Mark Andrews, surprisingly. Not sure it's going to stay that way, but definitely think Sammy Watkins should have scored more fantasy points than he has so far. A lot of people would probably say that about his entire career, I guess, but still the case here in 2021. Really like Michael Pittman as the last wide receiver on this list for the main slate on Sunday in week 4. The Colts are just pretty anemic right now, but Pittman definitely the leader at wide receiver for them. Again, like the guys I mentioned above, Claypool and Parker, just not performing up to the expectation of what his opportunity sort of suggests he should have done from a realized fantasy point perspective. So he is underperforming on this list. This is probably the closest you're going to get to a Sunday Night Football showdown slate, single game FanDuel slate, single game Yahoo slate. Should be playing on Yahoo single game, by the way. Definitely they have some nice contests over there. Big contest not filling every night. Definitely want to check that out. 2 Patriots wide receivers here, Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar, extremely underperforming their opportunity. Not only that, based off of the research Brian Jester has done. Brian Jester, obviously the one doing our great showdown preview videos every single week for Thursday Night Football, Monday Night Football, doing his premium podcast with Colin Drew of Daily Roto, for members only here, available at Occupy Fantasy. Make sure you're not missing out on that. We don't produce that content on Sunday night, but if those guys did produce that content for Sunday night and they were talking about Sunday Night Football, not only would they tell you to stick to the plan of focusing on having at least 3 underdogs in your showdown lineups, because the field just does not value underdog teams in showdown as much as they should. Now we have 2 Patriot wide receivers that have been underperforming their opportunity. It means they're still seeing plenty of targets, plenty of air yards, plenty of attention from Mac Jones in this passing game, but they're not necessarily scoring as many fantasy points as they should have through 3 weeks of play here. So have an opportunity here on Sunday Night Football to take 2 Patriots wide receivers and probably build some really, really nicely correlated lineups with upside, with more uniqueness than the field on Sunday Night Football Showdown slate with Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar. So those are the underperforming wide receivers here in week 4. And this is a list that we will have every single week for the rest of the season. We look at a rolling sample of recent games, we adjust our model for that, and we give you a new list of underperforming wide receivers every single week. We'll make a point to talk about those guys here in this video every Wednesday when we release that for you for the rest of the season here. So make sure you don't miss that. That's going to do it for this rundown of wide receivers in week 4, folks. Really appreciate you watching this video. If you liked what you saw here, please give us a thumbs up on the video. It lets us know that you really like the content that we produced here and that you'd like to see more of it. If you're not subscribed to the channel already, we would really appreciate it if you would do so. You will get notification when we release new videos each time we post a new one. So definitely want to make sure you're doing that to make sure you're not missing out on the great content that we have for you. Not just wide receiver takes, not just underperforming wide receivers. More content will be available for you in the daily plug at OccupyFantasy.com. That's our weekly written article for members of OccupyFantasy.com about the upcoming NFL main slate. So not just wide receivers covered, we'll have tips for you on quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, defenses. But more importantly, we'll give you some of the things you really need to comprehend and understand for building lineups for both low-risk lineups, which are your head-to-heads and double-ups, stuff like that, and high-risk lineups, which are your small field tournaments, large field tournaments, satellite contests. Really important to take not just the players that we like, but then take those and cater the strategy of deploying those players appropriately for the type of contest that you're playing. That's really how you find success in DFS, and that's how we find success in DFS. So happy to kind of share the wealth there and try and do our best to pass those tips and tricks on to you each and every single week. Lots of things going on here in the YouTube channel every single day. Basically, at this point, we have a new video coming out, so make sure that you're subscribed so you see those as well. Something we missed, something we talked about that you want to learn more about, please leave a comment below. We'd be happy to reply to you there and talk about it. You can also join our Discord. Our Discord button is linked below the video for you to do that. Certainly would love to see you in there asking us questions, asking the staff, other members questions about what's going on in the NFL DFS world, other sports that are going on. We have NHL, NBA coming up soon. Definitely going to be a good time to get in the Discord and talk to other sharp DFS players about what's going on. Love to have you in there. Once again, for OccupyFantasy.com, I'm Chris. Thank you for watching this video. And as always, we will talk to you soon.